Okay, this latest installment of Change My Mind is regarding the abortion issue. I'm pro-life, change my mind. So probably the most contentious that we've discussed.
I would say so.
Could certainly be argued. Warning, this one is it 45 minutes?
It's like 53.
It's 53 minutes, so it's very long. And I know that when you're watching this, it can feel very frustrating. I know I did. So I think it's important to lead with where this conversation ends up, because that will really help you understand the context of the conversation. So when would it be okay, I guess, to put limitations, let's say, on abortion?
Limitations.
When is it okay? Because we've acknowledged viability is not consistent, but you're okay with it anyway. You're the only one who's valuing the rights of one being over another being, the mother over a child, because you're the one who's actually proactively terminating a life, and you're okay with that. I'm simply saying no one has the right to terminate another life, just like you don't have. It's the non-aggression principle. You don't have the right to hurt me, I don't have the right to hurt you. I'm saying that person doesn't have the right to hurt that baby. You're saying it does. So you're saying her rights supersede that of the other life living, growing inside of her. So at what point is that okay or not okay, I guess, is where it comes down to.
It's dangerous to put any kind of limitations or controls around that, because she in the end is the one responsible for that and those circumstances, and I don't think that it's entirely fair to judge them without being in her shoes. I'm not sure what people felt about the decision that I made, but
but that doesn't change the essence of what is moral, what is a life. It's like saying, well, listen, I'm against slavery, I think it's bad, but if someone else makes that decision, I have no right to judge their right to choose slavery, because at one point that was considered okay. It doesn't matter what our opinion is if that's a life, and that's why it's the only question, I would say, that really needs to be answered before we have any other discussion.
So the moment of conception, that's where a woman loses all ability to make any decisions for...
No. You act as though I'm anti-choice. That's not true.
Well, how can you be pro-life and pro-choice?
Sure. I support 4 choices.
Okay.
Contraception, abstinence, motherhood, adoption.
Okay.
The only one I have a problem with is the 5th one, that's murder.
Murder.
Yes.
So you don't even use the word abortion, you just use the word murder.
Okay, killing. What is killing? Let's define. What is killing? What's the definition of killing?
Killing would be the cessation of...
The forcible cessation of someone else's life, right?
Murder or killing.
Let's. I'm trying to see.
I can kill the tree, but I mean that.
Okay, killing is it would relate to a person. Would it be the forcible termination of someone else's life? Killing.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Now, what is murder?
It's the cessation of a formed life.
It's killing with intent, right?
Well,
to simplify
it. Otherwise, it's manslaughter or whatever
Sure.
else.
Okay. So we agree on murder. So if that's a life, how is abortion not murder?
Because again, at different points, it's not. It's not viable.
Let me answer your question with as much specificity as I can. You said, yes, I believe that once that unique human DNA is created that's separate from the mother, separate from the father, to an entirely new person, yeah, I don't support the forcible termination. So that's my view, to be, just so I'm very consistent. So let's look at the fetal development. Where is it okay for you? What point is it okay to kill? So why do I think that's important? We don't do a whole lot of editing with the Change My Mind series. That's what people really like about it. Mm-hmm. In this case today, we're going to provide a little bit of commentary, again, because it's 53 minutes long. It'll be intermittent. It'll be brief. I think it's important for you to see this and for you to note that some people, it doesn't matter how convincing your arguments are. Maybe my arguments aren't that convincing. It doesn't matter how civil you are. Sometimes you're not going to get anywhere. And often with, when you do Q&As, whether it's me at UMass or Ben Shapiro answering these questions, and you see these montages, swatted down, leftist.
Super entertaining.
Yes, it's super entertaining, but you don't see those quiet moments afterward where that person, sometimes they still think they're right. Sometimes their mind isn't changed. Sometimes you run into someone, in this case, I was wondering, my gosh, we go through viability, you'll see, we go through the idea of obviously viability outside of the womb, also the idea of sentience. All this is kind of covered today. And I found myself frustrated, and it is hard to identify sometimes, okay, is it me not doing a good job? Or is this somebody whose heels are so dug in their mind won't be changed? And I think that when you see this woman looked at that chart, looked at a 9-month-old baby and said, I don't care, no abortion laws. And so
I don't know what to say to that. And you realize there is no common ground there. Viability doesn't matter. And looking back on this conversation, if you think it seems like circular logic and it's frustrating, it's because it doesn't matter. She's okay with aborting a 9-month-old baby anyway.
Yep. That's why you're never going to pin her down on any specific issue, as you'll see that, like you discussed, you're never going to find a place to agree upon because that's not her end game.
But she brings these up as smoke screens.
Nice lady,
but she brings up, well, I think it's about viability. Well, what about rape and incest? She doesn't care about any of those things because she looked at the graph of the fetus, zygote fetus baby, to use her words, and said nowhere, no abortion
ethics
laws.
Completely.
And I think this is important because a lot of people sometimes will send us emails and say, well, how do I have this person who's coming over to Thanksgiving, a family member, how do I convince them? Sometimes you need to sit in the pocket, you need to take as many swings as you can, you need to try and change their mind as best as possible, and you need to accept that it won't happen anyway. And it's hard, it's a hard pill to swallow because obviously, if you're someone who cares about changing minds, you're going to look back at yourself and say, gosh, could I have done a better job? Sometimes maybe you can. Sometimes it's just somebody who says, abortion up to 9 months, no laws at all, period. So with that being said, that context, let's watch this video and kind of take you through the series of arguments that brought us to that conclusion.
What was your name, by the way?
Jen.
Jen. Steven, nice to meet you. All right, Jen, well, here, you can hold this if you want.
Okay.
Just, talking to the, you're talking to the stick.
Change my.
Beg your pardon?
So I'm just supposed to tell my
No,
story?
you just talk to me. Yeah, we're just having a conversation. So,
Okay.
Jen, I'm Steven. I can hold it if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd
that's
be
fine.
better.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes people get a little more formal.
awkward.
I don't bite. So, all right. I appreciate it. Before we even set up, you were really quick to say, okay, you seemed surprised. You said, is that for real? When you saw the sign, I'm pro-life, changed my mind. Why? What was so surprising about it?
In my experience dealing with pro-life, either protests or discussions, normally it's not changed my mind. Normally it's they show pictures of actual abortions or trying to guilt women or shame them into decisions that they've made. It's not really about having, a repartee. It's more about kind of either a religious ideology or, their personal ideology, and just kind of trying to force that on you rather than trying to having a conversation where we can understand each other.
Right.
And where we're coming from and why we have these different values.
Right.
And also because we're across from the art museum, so I didn't know if it was an experiment, like a social experiment, to see what people's
You thought it just might be ironic?
I just thought I would ask.
Okay. No, yeah, it is for real. So I am pro-life.
Okay.
This is a series. We've done it on gun control. We've done it on free speech. Just listening to the other side, giving someone who genuinely believes from the opposite side of the political, cultural spectrum than I do to change my mind, to convince me, and have a respectful but critical dialogue of issues that we all talk about in today's political realm, but often it's shouted about.
Right.
So
Understandable.
I am open to having my mind changed.
And I have an international relations degree. I've worked for the United Nations. I've worked for the State Department. So I'm very much about understanding and coalition building and discussion. I am not about the shouting.
Okay.
So also my daughter is standing right here. She's a wonderful, shining example, honors student. I had her when I was 16. Life is very important to me.
Great.
But recently I had a different kind of experience.
So as I promised, we'll keep these commentaries really brief, but one thing you'll notice with Change My Mind, anytime someone comes up who's really hardcore against our viewpoint, they have invariably set up some kind of a victim status.
Almost always.
Trans disabled, I'm literally autistic. In this case, someone who needed an abortion out of a medical necessity. They use it because when they feel their argument is on shaky ground or their position, they revert back to it. You'll see.
I am married. I also, during my experience at the State Department, was a prisoner of war. So I have very severe PTSD that causes a seizure disorder. And I was on seizure medication when I found out that I was pregnant. And I don't know if you know this or not, but when fetuses are developing, it's actually nerve bundles that create, the arm or the leg or fingers or whatever.
Sure.
And
There's-
seizure medication by design is created to limit nerve bundles and certain synapses and certain processing, because the person with a seizure disorder means that they're firing too much or in a way that they shouldn't be.
Okay.
So, found out that I was pregnant, went to my OBGYN, the same one that delivered my daughter, and literally on the sonogram watched my baby die cardiac cell by cardiac cell by cardiac cell, not because of anything, a choice that I didn't make, not because I wasn't, not because the
Sounds
child
awful.
was outside of a marriage, not because, and there was nothing that I could do. I could either continue to, at first it had 7 cardiac cells, and then we went back to another sonogram and it had 4, and then it had 3, and then it had 2. So my options were to literally let the fetus die and begin rotting inside of me, or to go to a clinic based on Texas law and get it taken care of before I had to actually physically experience
Jeez,
that death.
right.
So to me, based on the safety of, you know, my safety, and if I didn't have that option available to me, and the trauma that would have caused, I think that there are unique situations, especially, you know, when a woman's been, you know, raped or whatever, that's something that should be available to them as a decision that they make.
Okay. Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, of course.
So you first came in, I know you said that you said life was very important to you, but you didn't say pro-life. So can we, I guess, establish what that means first, before I kind of want to unpack the personal story, which I can only imagine is harrowing. I've never been through that. I'm not going to act as though I can relate to that. I'll do my best as we discuss it. But you said life is very important to you, and then went into that story. What does that mean?
I've fought for life my entire life. I've risked my life for other people's lives. That's why I went into international relations.
Okay.
I worked at the United Nations. I was very successful at setting something up for people that live in rural areas, setting up social and economic development for them.
Okay.
It's something that I dedicated my education to. It's something I dedicated my career to. It's something that I was eventually captured by rebels in West Africa, you know, trying to still fight for.
Right.
So it's not something that I take lightly
Sure.
at all. But the option for a woman, especially given the position that I was in, and when my obstetrician that I had.
I'm going to hold this a little closer because of all the ambulances, so forgive me. I don't mean to intrude, but we won't be able to hear you that well. Go ahead.
But when I went to my obstetrician when I was pregnant with my daughter at 16, or 15 actually, I had her when I was 16, she didn't say, you know, what are you doing? Go take care of this.
So you wouldn't consider, so you asked if we were serious because you definitely don't consider yourself pro-life then, in that sense.
Not in that sense.
Okay. So my next question is, you used the word, you said, rather than endure that trauma.
Right.
Did you mean that for the baby or yourself?
I meant it, I guess, primarily watching it. Every time I went in was increasingly more traumatic. Watching each cardiac cell die off was
Sure.
increasingly more traumatic.
Do you mean for you or traumatic on the...
For me and for my husband.
Okay.
Right.
So-
At that point in time, depending on what you believe, the nervous system hadn't really been fully formed, so I don't know how much trauma but it was dying nonetheless, and there was nothing that we could have done at that
Okay.
point in time based on the medication that I was taking.
It's interesting to me that you just used the word dying. Why would you use that word?
Because its cardiac cells were dying. So without those cardiac cells, its heart stopped, and then it.
Sure.
Right.
But you said it was dying, not cardiac cells, it. So that would we agree that was a life?
That it was a potential life.
Now, important to note here, this is not a debate tactic. This is actually very important when discussing an issue to find out what your terms are, to define them so you're both understanding issues. And notice how she sort of hopscotch. She jumps from word lily pad to word lily pad using her own definitions.
Absolutely.
That happens a lot. And now it makes sense because she doesn't care where life begins anyway. She uses the word dying. She uses the word cell. She talks about heartbeat and then backtracks because none of it matters. We're okay with abortions up to 9 months. Let's keep that context.
Was it a potential life or a life?
It was a potential life.
Okay, can you help me with this? Again, being pro-life, differentiating between the idea, the potential of life versus a life. So when you say that as a potential life, potential for what?
A potential to grow into a baby that could self-sustain on some level outside of its mother's womb.
So you mean potential human. So the potential human is fulfilled into actual human. I want to make sure that I'm clear here so we understand the kind of the terms we're following. Mm-hmm. The potential human then becomes a human when it is sustainable outside of the womb.
I think that that's true. I think that until that point it is a decision between, because it is completely dependent on the mother.
Sure.
So to enforce certain laws or certain acts on her that the baby wouldn't be able to survive otherwise, I don't think is exactly pro-life. I mean, if you could extricate the baby and put it in a incubator pod or something, then maybe that would be more ideal. But forcing a woman who, in my situation, was just taking seizure medication,
Sure.
because of whatever. And again, not that it matters 100% whether you're married or not, but a lot of people say, but I was, and
Yeah.
it wasn't an economic situation.
No, I don't want to get into at all any of the economic or the
Right.
moral arguments or religious arguments. I don't think that does. I think it does a disservice to everybody when we're having this discussion. So I'm just interested in this concept you said of sustainability. Then you mentioned bringing it out and putting it into an incubator. So the potential for human life, we're now saying, is fulfilled as a human life when it can survive outside of the womb. Then you mentioned an incubator, but with technology, for example, now you have babies who can survive earlier than ever before.
It's true.
So does that change the value of the life? Let's say a baby today who's premature who can survive 3 months, 4 months early outside of the womb due to technology, as opposed to a baby in the 1940s. Is today's baby's life more valuable just because of our technology?
I don't think it's more valuable, but I think it speaks more to a woman's rights, because a lot of people that are pro-life, I understand that. I grew up with fundamentalist Christian mother.
Well, I understand, but let's put that
I'm
in. No one here is a fundamentalist Christian.
I'm just saying, in terms of my viewpoints, and
Sure.
they've been varied in terms of my own upbringing. But at some point, that child becomes a reality, and then there's a mother that's involved, and there seems to be a lot of support or a lot of fervor around the pro-life movement, and then not a lot of support about what happens after that point, and putting certain women, maybe such as the situation I was in, or other situations that are, and not giving them the right to choose what happens with their own bodies.
Again, trying to keep this brief, notice how she has not answered the question at all regarding the value of that life born today versus the 1940s, because I was using her own premise of an incubator. And now she's on to supporting the baby after it's born. In other words, free stuff, free healthcare, free college. This is sort of the bumper sticker logic that we move to, and it's important to bring them
If you're
back
really
to the point.
pro-life, then
right, if you're really pro-life,
X, Y, and Z.
free stuff. I try to bring her back here, again, assuming that we can find common ground. Now remember, she's okay with abortion up to 9 months with no restrictions, period. I didn't know this at the time.
And what happens with their
But
own
we've just agreed it's
futures.
not right. It's not your body at that point. If it's a baby in an incubator, right?
Right.
That's a life.
Right.
So we have
But
potential
is the pro-life
life
movement going to
and
then
life.
take care of that baby in the incubator?
Well, that's not what we're determining right now. What we're talking about is I'm pro-life, meaning I believe that that's a life. So it's first important, I think, if we're going to have a discussion and determine where we disagree, for example, as to where life begins, right?
Okay.
So according to what you just said, it's not life, it's potential life. Now, then we talked about technology and sustainability. So would you support abortions up until the moment of birth? Where does the line end then at that point? What makes it okay versus not okay? When is it a life?
That's an interesting question. Personally, And I've never been in the position of someone who's had to have one. I find partial birth abortions grotesque.
You'll see later on, though, she really doesn't, because she doesn't want to put any limitations on them. And this is kind of a hedge, too. Personally, but I can't push it on someone else. Well, personally, I find murder wrong, but it's not my position to tell someone else if they can or cannot murder. That's why the definition of where life begins, or whether or not it is a life, at this point she's effectively conceded that it is, matters so much. But some people just don't care anyway.
Okay.
To me, that is a viable life. That
Okay.
is unnecessarily destroyed, and I think that there's parents out there that are willing to adopt or whatever, that would be willing to take over if the mother is that desperate in that circumstance. And then my understanding is that happens either after 6 or 7 months of the pregnancy. Typically, when the baby, if it were fully born,
Right.
would be viable.
Right.
So I think that that's kind of maybe in terms of when it's a life, when it is viable outside of the womb or outside of, I guess, or within, science or an incubator. But at that point, then I think there needs to
Well,
be
before
more
you go on,
attention to what's going to happen at that point, because the discussion of when life starts is important, but also then what happens to
well,
the
hold
rest
on,
of that.
before we move on, like to give you an example, right? Because I'm pro-life.
Sure.
So I understand that you want to move on afterwards, and we'll probably get into the idea of a social safety net, healthcare. I understand where you're coming from. But before we get there, right, I'm pro-life. The idea is to change my mind on this, or find where we disagree. Before we move on to another discussion, let's say you're driving home tonight, right? And you see someone in the road, right? And you have plenty, assuming you're not going to hurt anyone by stopping, pumping the brakes, do you stop?
If I see someone on the road,
Yeah, to not hit them.
yes.
I would too. I think we're probably both decent human beings. Now let's say you're same scenario, you're driving home tonight. You're not entirely sure, but you're pretty sure you see someone in the road. Do you stop?
For the most part, yes. Unless
Yeah.
I see that person with, I don't know, like a chainsaw.
No. I'm just saying, if you're seeing someone crossing the road,
Yeah.
you stop, you know it's a person. And let's say you weren't sure it's a person, but you saw someone crossing the road and you could stop. Would you stop?
Typically.
Because you'd err on the side of not ending a life, right?
Typically.
And so that's the discussion we're having here. Is I haven't heard an answer on it. Perhaps I've missed it. Where does life begin? Because if we don't know entirely, of course, I would say we both agree you have to err on the side of allowing the possibility that that's a life. So where does life begin? I think it's the most important question. We can't move on from that conversation to what happens after birth if we don't agree where life begins.
I don't know if that's entirely true, because that's also very important.
It's important, but not if we're killing a life. That's more important than providing it, let's say, with free health care. If we're killing a life, right? So we have to get to that point. Where does life begin? What constitutes a life?
Okay, and then also what constitutes. I've answered a lot of questions, so and I appreciate your empathy regarding my situation and admitting that you'd not been in that circumstance before. What, given my circumstance, do you think would have been a better decision?
Well, again, all of these questions are answered if you can answer the first question, which is the most important question for you to determine your position. What determines a life? Where does life begin?
I have answered it. When it's viable outside the womb.
When it's viable outside the womb. But I don't think that you have answered it that way. So we say, for example, that a baby born in New York City, because of the technological advancements they have to make it viable outside the womb, that's a life, and that exact same baby at that same gestation period is not a life in West Virginia, where it wouldn't be able to be viable outside the womb. What determines viability? What do we mean by viability? Maybe I'm getting confused
Its
there.
ability to live outside of the womb, with either with the assistance that's available or because it's matured to that point within its mother's womb.
One thing you notice, she uses a lot of words like personally, primarily, notably, most likely to hedge her bets, and she tries to go to the personal scenario. That's why it's so important. She set up me, personal victim, so that she can go back to it when she hasn't answered the question. And if this is where we get to the point where if it seems like circular logic, she claims that she's answered with viability, but she didn't really answer the question of, it does a point in time, 1940s versus today, does geographical location determine the value of life? She hasn't answered it. The reason it's starting to get circular, this is why I wanted to show the ending first, is because she doesn't care anyway. She's just trying to, she's just completely unwilling to concede ground. And this is, I should have recognized this here and probably just jumped to the fetal chart. But being a dumbass, I thought I could maybe have a civil conversation and convince her. But I didn't realize, like, I thought maybe there's a middle ground. I didn't realize her middle ground was 8 months.
Okay, but you mentioned an incubator.
Right.
So let's say there's no incubator
I was talking
within
about,
Access.
like, Matrix style, like.
Okay,
you know.
science fiction.
Not science fiction. I mean, I don't think we're too far away from it. I'm just saying that.
No, we're not. It exists right now. I mean, more babies are viable than ever
Right,
before.
Exactly.
Again, but the viability would be determined by geographical location. So
Sometimes.
does that determine the value of human life?
I think it does, actually. And it has proven geopolitically that it has determined life for.
So you would agree with that? You would say a life, for example,
I
in the
don't-
West Indies is worth less than a North American life in Lenox Hill Hospital.
I think that's the reality of the situation.
So right there, in order to avoid the question, she sort of presents this cynical viewpoint. Well, I think we've seen that, meaning the human rights issues that occur in third world countries, but then tries to sort of shift away from it. So do you believe that? Because the question was, again, where do you believe life begins? And she's saying, well, we've seen that society and technology determines it, and then tries to play the whole, the unfortunately angle. But she's the one who presented it.
I don't necessarily agree with it or think that it's optimal, but I think that that is the reality that we have to deal with. And I think that the reality that I had to deal with was not optimal either, and that
Sure.
I was not given very many other options except for literally sit here and watch it progressively die
There's that word die again.
until its last heartbeat, or, you know, try to
Whose heartbeat?
the fetus's heartbeat.
The other life's heartbeat.
The fetus's heartbeat at 6 weeks that was not viable, that had gone from 7 cardiac cells to 2.
Right.
Right.
But you were talking about how traumatic it was.
That it would have been traumatic to continue to just go to the obstetrician and watch it die further instead of taking
Die.
some.
This comes back to the issue. My issue is I'm pro-life, changed my mind. If entertain this thought for a while, because we talk about viability, right? Well, viability or sustainability, there's a certain level of dependence, obviously, in all stages of development, and certainly after the birth. I mean, most babies would not make it more than half a day after the birth if not for someone else taking care of that baby, right? So we have to determine what viability is, what dependency is. Older people, there are some older people who are entirely dependent, who are entirely non-viable without assistance. I still say that they're a human life. We have people who are in comas who are not viable without people taking care of them. I still say that's a valuable human life. When you get outside of the scientific realm of life, and you've kind of used this term yourself when you talk about another heartbeat dying, ending that life, after conception, right, there's a unique genetic code that determines male pattern baldness, to eye color, to sex, to the heartbeat, which is separate from yours immediately. It's the only consistent line to draw to determine what life is. Outside of that, it's circumstantial. And that's where you end up, as in your boat, you know, valuing certain lives over other lives.
I guess you could say that, but it's kind of like saying, well, you know, and then this is an oversimplification, obviously, when we're discussing humans, but, you know, like, a chick hatching, you know, too early, what's the responsibility there? A tadpole, you know, leaving its little egg where it's got its, you know, nutrition, and then, you know, not being viable there. It's not, though, while they are two separate questions, they are completely distinguishable in terms of what the end result is. And so we can talk about when life starts, but there has to be a discussion about viability and healthcare and women's rights intermixed in that. I don't know. I mean, what do you think, for example, a woman that conceives a child as the product of rape? I mean, What do you think, honestly, her option should be?
Well, what I think wouldn't change whether that's a life or not, right? Knowledge nor ignorance changes the very nature of something. So it still comes to the question whether that's a life or not. What I think about rape is that rape is terrible. That doesn't change the circumstance that there's a life growing inside of that woman.
Okay, so that woman's life somehow is superseded by...
No, not at all.
But when being forced to carry that child would...
No, I would never force anyone to carry a child.
So then what are the other options?
No, I'm not forcing anybody to carry a child. I'm simply barring someone from killing a life.
But you can't have it both ways.
There's not having both ways. I'm not
carry a
forcing. The
child.
rapist has committed an evil act.
Right, but it's been
And so
done.
I'm simply saying
It's
that
been
you
done
can't
in
meet an
conception.
evil act with an even greater evil, which is the termination of a life. I'm not forcing anyone to bear a child. I would never do that.
But how do you say that then conception is where life starts, but you're not gonna, but you would never agree with forcing someone to carry a child if a woman that
I'm
had
not.
conceived as a consequence of a rape, that's why she was carrying a child. You would say
Right.
you would never force that on anyone.
No, of course not.
But that would be that would be her reality. That there would be a life, according to you, growing inside of
Well-
her that had started, and then what?
For example, right now, if you were to say, I forced you to give this interview,
No.
is that, no, but let's say you said it.
Okay.
Would that be true?
No.
So because you say something or because you think something doesn't change the nature of it, correct? So because you say I'm forcing a woman by not allowing her to terminate a life doesn't change the fact that I'm not forcing anyone to carry a life.
By not giving
There was a
her-
crime occurred, and then I just don't believe in meeting evil with an even more evil act.
I understand what you're saying, but by not giving her the option, you are.
Well, not giving her the option, again, of killing a life, of murder is what you're discussing. It doesn't change the nature
But by
of
not
it.
giving her the option, then you are forcing her to carry a rape child.
No, I'm not.
Then what other option does she have other than to carry it?
Well, it'd be like saying you're being forced, for example, to take care of your child. Because the law says that you have to feed that child, even though
Yes.
it's completely
The law
non-viable
says that
without your
because
intervention.
You entered into a social contract when you decided to have sexual intercourse with somebody willingly, and you understand one of the
Correct.
consequences of that might be procreation.
See here, she doesn't see the irony in exactly what she says. The consequences might be procreation. Now, we've gotten into the rape discussion, which does, again, it doesn't matter because she's okay with an abortion up to 9 months. So this was more of a philosophical point. I tried to explain that simply ignorance doesn't change the nature of an action. Missed. So a big swing and a miss. So I thought, okay, let's try and bring it back to the vast bulk of abortions. But again, why is she bringing up rape? Why is she bringing up the idea of partial abortion? None of it matters. That's why I thought people need to see the conclusion first. You'll see. Let's get back to nearly all abortions, which of course aren't from rape.
No, that's not why.
Well, that's
We're talking about the nature of what life is, right? This is the deep root, which seems that you continually avoid
I'm not
it.
avoiding it. I'm saying that there are consequences beyond that, but without examining it,
Okay, but
it's a fascinating
let's agree on
concept to
that.
talk
Let's say
about
we
when
give you
life
that. Let's say we
starts.
give you that. Okay, let's say we give you that. Let's say rape, incest, right? The less than 0.5% of abortions. Let's say we give you this.
Okay.
So then, let's get that off the table. Give it to you. What about the vast majority of abortions, which we both know are committed because of convenience? Would we both find common ground there that that's immoral? That that's terminating a life and that's immoral?
I would say that based on my experience in life and based on things that I've been exposed to, that I think that I think people should be held to a higher level of responsibility for their actions.
Okay.
And that I do think life is sacred. But for anyone to go out and judge and say that this person got into this situation because of convenience or irresponsibility is an oversimplification of most of those circumstances. And yes, I do think that there should be, like I said, increased responsibility and more education, but I don't think that should take away the right that the woman has to know in her own situation, in her own abilities, what what she's capable of doing and capable of caring for, and the life that will then exist beyond those 9 months for the rest of its life. I don't think that
I'm sorry. I'm trying to see what your answer was there.
Do I think that it's immoral? That was your question.
Yes, to end a life. To end a life when it's, let's get rid of rape and incest off the table. So I'm trying to find some common ground here, because we both know statistically the vast majority of abortions are not committed for that reason. So if we take the giant bulk, statistically almost all of abortions that are currently being committed in this country, based on convenience or inconvenience, can we find common ground and say, okay, terminating a life, which I think we both agreed upon, is immoral?
Terminating a life in terms of like
abortion
is immoral.
Immoral. To kill another life. To kill something. To kill a person.
To kill a person.
I'm trying to be as very clear in my terms as possible. I know, because you've been somewhat vague, I want to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting what you're saying. Yes, to kill another human being is immoral.
To kill another human being is immoral.
Okay.
I want that. I agree with that. But I think that, again, you need to be careful about the definition of when that starts, and that because there are so many extenuating circumstances, having actual laws or litigation in this country where I would have had to seek some sort of, I don't know, like waiver or something from my doctor given my personal circumstances is also immoral.
Here's something I found really fascinating right here. She admits that killing a life, killing another human, is immoral, but then she says we have to be careful about how we define that life because of circumstances. When has circumstances ever determined science?
Yeah, I know, and that's where I should have realized at this point, because all of her arguments rest in the circumstantial, which cannot be proven or questioned, and you see that as it progressively it gets less pleasant.
It seems that it seems a very common thread when we have these conversations, someone comes in and says, I am this, therefore it's different for me. What I'm trying to do is get on the table here the vast majority of abortions and determine when life begins.
But there are no two circumstances that are the same.
There absolutely are. There absolutely are. Yours is a very extreme case. Yours is a very extreme case.
It's not actually. I had a very close friend that had the same thing happen to her, but except it happened
statistically
to her 4 months.
Statistically it is. Statistics and these facts matter, and especially when we determine when life begins.
If those laws existed, then she and I would both be in very different boats.
But what if that saves billions of lives? What if that saves hundreds and hundreds of millions of lives? Again, if we need to have a conversation as to where life begins, and if we agree on that, if we don't agree on that, then that determines whether killing this life or potential life, as someone sees it, is morally acceptable or not. Because maybe in some extenuating circumstances, we would say, okay, in this instance, this is moral for me. But what about the hundreds of millions of lives that have been killed and ended?
Can I ask you a question?
Here's the point where she hasn't answered any of my very framed-in, clearly defined questions, and so she asks me if this is religiously based. Now, let me ask you, have you heard me make any religious argument here?
None.
No. So, Your Honor, I object, but this is what happens.
No.
Is your belief system primarily spiritually based, religious based?
Nothing that I've discussed here has anything to do with that.
No, but I'm asking
Purely
you, where does this...
I don't think that's relevant. I think what's relevant is determining where life begins. Because you haven't answered.
I actually have answered several times.
You've said viability, but it's been remarkably inconsistent.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah, it has.
No, I've said outside of the womb or outside of scientific...
So the value of life differs from, say, West Virginia or South Africa than the United States. And you support that. You're saying that's okay.
I'm not saying that's okay. I'm saying that's the reality. And I'm saying taking the choice away from women that are in those situations would be a crime against their lives.
Gosh, I hate to come in, but this is the exact same argument she made earlier. Well, unfortunately, this is the case. This is the reality, right? We see that some babies are valued more than others, as though it's this grave injustice. Yet then she says we must continue to perpetrate this injustice to ensure that this is where, if it seems frustrating watching, believe me, I thought, am I missing this?
Right. So you're not at all concerned with the lives in those cases that you're terminating, that you're killing.
I'm concerned with them, but
Not much.
there is a life already that it is in existence, that is in development, that would be adversely affected.
So I want to be very clear here. You just said that's the way it is, so you support the premise that a life is more valuable in
I
Lenox
don't
Hill
support
Hospital.
No. You're taking
Then
words
it
out
is-
of my mouth.
you said
and
that's the way
also
it
it's a little bit
is.
offensive because as I told you, I have an international relations degree and I've worked for the United Nations and I've worked for the State
Great.
Department. So I've fought for human rights in people's lives my entire career, my entire education. So you're reducing what I'm saying a little bit. I'm saying that that is just the reality
Right.
of the world.
And you use that to define where life begins, correct? You said viability. That's
Right.
your okay.
Yes.
So the value of human life differentiates based on geographical location according to your premise. That's okay.
Not my premise. The premise that was created by colonial powers, imperialists, whoever you want to say. But that's why there's differences in terms of medical developments and all of those things in different parts of the world. And I've been all over the world, so I know how life is valued in different places, and that is just
Sure.
the reality
In
of
some
it.
places it's okay to take a sex slave. We would both agree that that's completely morally reprehensible, right?
I would agree with that.
Right. So would we not both agree that geographical location, being born in Lenox Hill Hospital, shouldn't make your life more valuable than someone who's born, let's say, in the plains of Zimbabwe who doesn't have an
I
incubator?
completely agree with you, but I also agree that the reality of the situation is that there's always been a difference in terms of prices on human life. Our country has a really great history.
And you
of
support
not
that, then?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
Again,
then
I
it comes back
fought
to
my
where does
entire
life begin?
career
But where does
against
life
that.
begin then? Because you just said that's the reality.
It is the
If you fight for
reality.
human rights, what about that basic human right? Again, the right to
Whose
life.
human right?
The right of that child, the right of that baby
Why?
to be just as valuable in Sudan
How does it?
as it is
What,
in Manhattan.
what rights has it been able to? What rights as a fetus does it
As a baby.
have? Fetus? Is that a
As a baby. Depending on where it's born, it can be a baby, a viable baby, or it can be
Okay.
aborted. Yeah, depending, or it can be something that's just a death. But that's entirely dependent on where it's born.
Right, but that's the reality of the circumstance.
You see that long, uncomfortable pause there. The left is so used to using this umbrella fetus umbrella term as though it just makes it go away. She's used the word repeatedly: dying, cardiac cells ending, death. But it's all okay if you just say it's not. I say it's not a baby; it's a fetus. At this point, even though we're discussing a viable baby, depending on where it's born, but say fetus, and all that goes away.
Taking that away from a woman who's in those more difficult places, who doesn't have those medical
But do you understand how
advancements
it's an
available to
inconsistent? My
her.
point is your viability
It's-
line is very inconsistent. It's not a consistent
No.
measurement.
Do
You're
I-
ending a human life with its own DNA.
It's not inconsistent. I've always maintained viability, and I maintain that there just are geopolitical differences in terms of scientific advancements and in terms of availability, and that's just the reality. And whether if pro-lifers are going to go around the world and donate billions and billions and trillions of dollars to
And they do.
hospitals,
They do. Far more than the UN. They do far more charitable work than the UN.
okay.
Yes, statistically. You know
That's
this if
another
you fought for human
conversation.
rights.
That's a conversation.
Okay, it's a different
It
conversation.
depends on where you are, but I'm just saying that's been a sad reality, and perhaps with more support and perhaps with more education, that wouldn't be the case, and that I do think that that no
You
that
support
no
education.
woman-
I don't understand. Okay, let's remove different countries because maybe that's sort of the barrier here. Let's just go to state borders. Let's say a baby right now, 6 months old. Okay, 6 months old, Lenox Hill Hospital, completely viable, right? Best medical technology available.
Okay.
Same exact baby. Okay, Hills of Tennessee, born the same time. One lives, one doesn't. All right. So does that make it acceptable or one life less valuable to abort at that term in a pregnancy? Where is it okay? When is it okay to abort? Because we've now determined that viability can vary.
Right.
So, at that point, we would say abortion is not acceptable because it could be viable
That's
outside
not
the
point
woman
we
you
were
are.
making. The point we were making was
You
when
mentioned
does life
viability.
begin?
You mentioned, you said viability.
No, we were talking about when does life begin.
Yes,
And I said
correct me if I'm wrong, you said viability.
Right.
So that is determined by where they could be born or when they could be born, right? There are a lot of different circumstances.
Right.
So do those different circumstances determine the actual value, the essence of human life? Is that your presupposition?
If you want to talk about the value of human life in terms of like an overarching definition, no.
So here we go. This is where I should have just brought out the fetal chart. She says, if you want to talk about the overall idea of the value of life, no, but the reality, yes. In other words, she's saying that yes, value is determined by technology, by your access to doctors, to your healthcare provider. That determines whether you are a human or not. And that's why the conclusion was so important, because now you see why this just nonstop circular logic makes sense from her position.
If you want to talk about the reality, then yes.
Okay. So the reality is, even though that baby is viable, as you've just agreed, you'd be okay with aborting it if it's in a place where it wouldn't be able to be put on support.
I said that I believe that life begins at viability. I said that unfortunately, and based on experience, whether you want to if you want to take other countries out of it, then that's fine, even though that's the majority of the world's population. Then
I didn't, because you said geopolitically. So go ahead and put it back in. Put it back in.
That's fine.
Put it back in for your argument.
United States.
Put it back in.
No, it's fine.
Put it right back in there.
I don't need to. I'm just saying that viability is one thing, life is another, and yes, lives have always had different values in different places.
Viability is one thing, life is another, but you just said that viability is what determines a life.
I said that in terms of, you said would abortion be okay where there weren't the scientific advancements available in one place versus the other? And I didn't...
I was asking, is the value of the life determined by that technology or by the era in which the baby is born?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. So to you, that's what determines the value of human life?
Not to me. To the rest of
Well,
the
I'm asking
world.
you, what is your opinion then? Convince me, because my opinion is there's no consistent line. I'm trying to be as clear in terms as possible. There's a unique human genetic code created at conception. You mentioned a heartbeat. That's not your heartbeat. It's not the father's heartbeat.
Right.
You don't have, when you were when you were carrying your lovely daughter there, you didn't have 4 feet. You didn't have 4 hands. You had a separate life living inside of you. Mm-hmm. My contention is, of course, that scientifically that life we see begins at conception. DNA is created. You said viability, and then I was just showcasing how viability is determined by geography, by different points in history, and then you said, I don't support it, but that's the way it is. So I'm asking you, where is your line as to where life begins?
My line is at viability.
And this is like we were talking about before. This is where that kind of cross section occurs, where far right and far left meet, where culture determines.
Yeah, your value
morality.
and morality, it comes from your immediate culture.
Right, not science.
There is no
not
ultimate
any
truth.
intrinsic
There is
value.
not, no.
It is remarkable, but again, when you don't care if it's a 9-month-old baby, all of this makes sense. If that isn't your position, almost none of this makes sense. It's certainly
More
completely
smokescreen.
inconsistent. Yeah, all a smokescreen.
Do I support the differences in different places where viability begins? No. But until we have more equality as far as that is concerned, I don't believe in taking the right away from women to make certain decisions.
So you've just acknowledged, I just want to be clear, that a viable life, because of its geographic location, you are okay with killing.
I'm not okay. I'm saying that's the reality of the situation.
So you are against it, but it's the reality of the situation.
I'm saying that I wish that mother could get more support and education. But
that wouldn't change viability at that point. There's a life growing inside of you. This baby is 6 months, let's say 5 months, let's say 7 months. If the mom could have a PhD, it doesn't change the fact that if that baby's born premature, it won't survive in this area of West Virginia compared to Manhattan. It doesn't change anything. But you're okay with aborting, let's say, at that point.
Notice there's no response there. The left is so used to going completely unquestioned, where their solution for everything is more education, more healthcare, more support, more funding.
Translation? For money.
Even though it doesn't change anything. And in a sense, that's why she doesn't respond to it, because it's the first time I think this kind of a premise has gone questioned with her.
I think it's situational. What I'm not okay with is taking away a woman's right to make certain decisions about her body, and I think that's...
But that's not her body, right? We both established that.
But it is, though.
But it's not. It's not if it lives in New York and it doesn't live in West Virginia. You're just saying, again, you're saying, okay, here I'm against it because it can live in a hospital in the Upper East Side, but here I'm not.
I'm saying that
it's not her body.
Is that those differences exist. Scientific advancements, those differences exist.
I completely agree.
Support, all of that, those things exist.
Mm-hmm.
And until we get some more even ground on that, I think it's...
But does that change the essence of personhood? Does science change the value of life? Does science change the essence of what a human being is?
I think it's proven that it has. I mean, we could go way off topic and talk about human growth hormone or steroids or science. Yes, it does.
That doesn't determine a life.
Yes, it does. It changes the essence of the life. It changes the quality of that.
What
life.
is personhood? What makes a human being, I guess, is a question. What makes a human being, what determines a human life? And that's just, I feel like we're getting hung up there because I'm just not seeing a very consistent rationale in applying your standard here. It seems like we're going in circles.
If it seems inconsistent, it's because I think it's a dangerous segue into removing rights that shouldn't be removed because there are unique situations and because there are these differences and because there are a lack of resources and because there is a lack of education, and saying that, well, this is where life begins, then you're automatically getting into the discussion about murder, and I don't think that that's appropriate.
Why isn't that appropriate? If life has begun and you're ending that life.
Because again, it's about viability, and we have just had a discussion about how that's different in different places and how life is valued differently in different places.
Right, but in my point is that with my position, killing that life is very consistent. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. It doesn't matter whether it would live in New York and not in the Sudan. It doesn't matter whether it would live in West Virginia and not in a hospital in Tennessee. None of that matters in my instance because I'm concerned with the rights of that life. And we both agree that in some instances, that life may be viable. It may not be viable.
Over the rights of the person carrying it.
No, not over the rights of the person carrying it. I'm simply not allowing the killing of one life. Not allowing the killing of one life is not forcing, one that you've acknowledged is viable, is not forcing somebody to do anything.
Yes, it is.
What's important here is we're both discussing a life at this point that we've both agreed is viable outside of the womb.
She wants to go back and forth based on convenience for her argument.
That's why this is so disturbing. We've both agreed that we're discussing a life viable outside the womb, and she still doesn't care. And this is where it snowballs pretty quickly.
Forcing someone to carry a baby to whatever term, especially in extenuating circumstances, or where the lack of resources that it is not realistically viable once it gets outside of the womb. So
Okay.
I think that, you know,
So when would it be okay, I guess, to put limitations, let's say on abortion?
limitations.
When is it okay? Because we've acknowledged viability is not consistent, but you're okay with it anyway. You're the only one who's valuing the rights of one being over another being, the mother over a child, because you're the one who's actually proactively terminating a life, and you're okay with that. I'm simply saying no one has the right to terminate another life, just like you don't have, it's the non-aggression principle. You don't have the right to hurt me, I don't have the right to hurt you. I'm saying that person doesn't have the right to hurt that baby. You're saying it does. So you're saying her rights supersede that of the other life living, growing inside of her. So at what point is that okay or not okay, I guess is where it comes down to. At what point is it okay to violate the non-aggression principle and terminate another life?
Again, I had made my statement pretty clear on partial birth abortions. I personally find them abhorrent. I know of one particular situation that was, whatever. But, maybe an argument can be made, but still. I think that that's where the education needs to come in. I think that and I think you're maybe diminishing a little bit the fact that it's not an easy decision for the mother. It's not optimal. It's not something that any woman actually that I've ever spoken to wants to do. I don't, again, I think because of the amazing amount of circumstances that a woman can experience and endure, that it's dangerous to put any kind of limitations or controls around that, because she in the end is the one responsible for that and those circumstances, and I don't think that it's entirely fair to judge them without being in her shoes. I'm not sure what people felt about the decision that I made, but
that doesn't change the essence of what is moral, what is a life. It's like saying, well, listen, I'm against slavery, I think it's bad, but if someone else makes that decision, I have no right to judge their right to choose slavery, because at one point that was considered okay, right? Someone's opinion on an issue doesn't change what it is. It doesn't matter what our opinion is on gravity. It doesn't matter what our opinion is on slavery if it's immoral. Indentured servitude, that's immoral. It doesn't matter what our opinion is if that's a life. And that's why it's the only question, I would say, that really needs to be answered before we have any other discussion.
So at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, not even, observable other than under a microscope at the moment of conception, that's where a woman loses all ability to make any decisions for...
No. You act as though I'm anti-choice. That's not true.
Well, how can you be pro-life and pro-choice?
Sure. I support 4 choices.
Okay.
Contraception, abstinence, motherhood, adoption.
Okay.
The only one I have a problem with is the 5th one, that's murder.
Murder.
Yes.
So you don't even use the word abortion, you just use the word murder.
Okay, killing. What is killing? Let's define. What is killing? What's the definition of killing?
Killing would be the cessation of...
The forcible cessation of someone else's life, right?
Murder or killing.
Well, let's. I'm trying to say.
I can kill the tree, but I mean.
Okay, killing is it would relate to a person. Would it be the forcible termination of someone else's life? Killing.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Now, what is murder?
Murder would be an aggressive, typically premeditated act to. It's the cessation of a formed life.
It's killing with intent, right?
Well,
to simplify
it. Otherwise, it's manslaughter or whatever
sure.
else.
Okay, so we agree on murder. So if that's a life, how is abortion not murder?
Because again, at different points, it's not viable. It's a consistent pattern that we see throughout nature when things aren't viable, when a mother doesn't have proper resources, that she takes care of it because of knowing what the experience will be of that child and of her family and her ability ever to starve to death on a ice floe or whatever. I mean, it's a pretty consistent.
Let me answer your question with
see.
as much specificity as I can. You said yes. I believe that once that unique human DNA is created, that's separate from the mother, separate from the father, to an entirely new person. Yeah, I don't support the forcible termination. So that's my view. To be just so I'm very consistent. So let's look at the fetal development. Where is it okay for you? What point is it okay to kill?
That's an interesting question because you're using the word kill and murder. That I don't.
Let's remove murder and kill. Let's assume that the abortion is accidental, so it's not murder.
Again, I don't believe in putting these.
At what point is it? I've said unique DNA, it's separate from the mother and father. At that point, the only consistent line, of course, in comparison to viability, sustainability. Here? You sounded like a question mark.
Well,
You're not sure.
I don't know. It's this ovulation period, so I'm trying to see where the actual conception is taken care of is taking place according to what you've put in front of me.
Yes, okay, so that's conception, week 1.
Okay.
So where is it okay to, where on this chart is it morally okay to kill?
Okay. Morally okay to kill, again, is a difficult question, and it's putting me into a box.
Okay, where is it morally okay to terminate a pregnancy? Let's use that term. I'm just trying to, because I've answered the question, I hope, as clearly as I can, conception. So I just would like to see you pick on the scale. Maybe that'll determine where we disagree.
It's not
I mean, because I'm looking at pictures of developing babies and I can see their characteristics forming on their fingers and their toes, and I understand what's going on. And I had a very difficult pregnancy with my daughter, so I went into the doctor 2 or 3 times a week. So I know exactly what
Where is
happens
it okay?
at every point. Again, I think it's very dangerous to put these very specific lines and say, okay, for this woman X, this is the point. For this woman Y, this is the point. I don't agree with putting those distinctions because we don't know what.
Where is it
situation
okay
she's in. We don't know if she's in Virginia.
to end
we
this
don't
life?
know if she's in New York. We don't know if she's been raped. We don't know what the circumstances are. Being a person that's suffered, has PTSD myself, you know, the trauma of a rape or whenever she's able to actually take care of it, that's a separate question.
That's irrelevant. Where is it
It's
okay
not-
to kill that life?
It's not irrelevant. I'm saying it's dangerous to put those parameters on.
But they
terminating
do
abortions.
exist. They do exist. The parameters exist whether you like them or not, or I like them or not.
Parameters exist, but
There are laws.
still legal.
There are
still
exactly. There are legal.
avenues.
There are laws. So
terminate a
I'm asking
pregnancy
your
up
opinion.
until-
Where should the law be? Where is it okay?
I don't think there should be one. I think that there are unique situations. I don't think that we should be mandating women's rights that way.
So nowhere here should there be any law.
No, I don't think there should be a law.
There shouldn't be any law that you can't
Based on
kill.
how I feel about it morally, does not change what her personal experience is, and
It doesn't change what this is. It doesn't change what these things are. You're looking right now at
But
people.
you're supposing that, and I have a real woman standing in front of me telling what's really going on.
But
with
this
her.
is real. This happened millions, many millions. I mean, you're talking about each week. That's real. So why is it? At what point is it okay to? You asked me. I said conception. This is where DNA is created.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely different. You talked about heartbeat, obviously unique from the mother and father. I've given you a clear answer.
And I've given you clearance.
You haven't. You said you don't believe in any limitations at all.
I think that there are situations that are so unique that to put laws on them would be a travesty and would be a punishment for certain women.
Okay. Well, the fact that you're okay terminating this
I told you already.
Doesn't
that
change
I
my
find
mind.
Partial birth abortion to be.
Well, then just pick the chart. Point. Tell me where partial birth abortion. Tell me where it's okay.
I told you.
Pick a
that
baby and point,
I
and that's an answer.
personally find it extremely repugnant and distasteful, but I know of a specific circumstance where, I can't be the judge of that. And I think that it's, again, dangerous to start this discourse without having other things like the education and funding in place. Because when you start
How is
the
this not
laws-
education? Right here, this tells you exactly what kind of development, where the baby is at each week. Is that not education? Right now you have the education of what that fetus, zygote, fetus, baby, to use your terms, is. Couldn't possibly be more
No,
informative.
until we have more education that's honest in this country about how contraception works, more responsible mentoring programs in terms of relationships and how conception works, until there's a support network that's in place for these women that would have made other decisions, but as you say, you support adoption, and that's a clearer, less guilted, morally repugnant path where a woman has to hang her head for 9 months and then painfully give away. Until those things have changed, I think it's dangerous to set these precedents and make these laws, because we don't have the support mechanisms in place for the after effect.
Sure. Okay. So no abortion laws. Appreciate it. That's your opinion. Very honest about it.
Thank you.
Hasn't changed my mind, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, so that was pretty tiring. That was pretty exhausting. I find it funny that at the end she's just bringing up my point. So whether it doesn't take into account whether it's New York or Virginia. That's the whole point. That's the whole key. That's what I was saying.
I
There's
don't
no
know how you
consistent-
do this, because when we take these, I'm far enough away, I don't hear what's going on. You just had to live through this twice.
Why? Because you know that when you've said stupid things, I've tried to wring your neck.
Exactly.
It goes against my nature. It is
I know.
really, and I think it goes against a lot of human nature. And that's why it's sometimes in the moment humiliating, where you're going, gosh, I'm not able to convince it. But then you realize at the end, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Nope.
I don't know what you say if you were to say to someone, man, the Holocaust was really, we shouldn't let that happen again. And someone says, yes, but some of the Jews were stealing money. So it's like, well, I don't know. You're okay with it.
I don't
so
have a
we're not
flashcard for this.
I don't know. Well, speaking of oh, by the way, her daughter. It turns this is her daughter. People were taking some. Her daughter was a fan. Her daughter's boyfriend in the military was a fan. So, hi, Gia. Listen, our daughter was very nice. This is not this whole thing is designed to be the opposite of just cable news sound bites, fighting, arguing, not being productive. But the backflips when the chart came out, I should have just brought that out earlier.
You should have brought that out earlier. One thing I think is funny, and I hope people take away from this, is that there's people in your life you think that office person, you're like, oh, don't get into this with that person. They really know their stuff. Just so we found even with Naomi Wolf, like these people don't really know their stuff. The ambassadors don't really know their stuff, and then when you get the people out there who are probably the most aggressive to talk about these things, you're like, I don't have the ammo to go up against this person. You realize when the circular conversations, they start happening, it's because they're just dodging and dodging and dodging. And then even when you brought out the chart, it's like, she was pissed you had a chart.
It's like, well, now the fact that you're showing this to me, like fingers and toes and so on. But I'm talking about a real woman. Like, no, this is it's just, it is.
She's just pissed you had clip art.
Yeah, oh no, he's got a Bristol board. It's the obfuscation. And listen, I hope people out there, I hope you watch this, and I hope it's at least inspiring to some degree, where you realize, hey, it doesn't matter who it is. Some people are unconvincible. Is that a term?
I think that's
some people can. I might be making it up.
I'll Google that later.
I'm tired. I just had to go through this twice. Some people can't be convinced. You can still be very civil, and at that point, listen, her daughter's a fan. Her daughter's boyfriend is a fan. It's not necessarily trying to convince this person, but to showcase the truth that you know to be self-evident to the audience. And the questioning, the Socratic method, the letting the questions play out, letting them answer their own questions, it only works if it's an argument from truth.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's what's important to me. Is I'm in watching this and in conducting this, I'm trying to find out if my argument, if my position is rational, and if my opponent's is rational. And in this case, as as bleak as it seems, the answer was pretty clear to me. Hey, did you enjoy this video? Here's the thing: you're here. This is the end of it, so we don't care because you already watched it. But if you really didn't like it and you want to justify it, leave a comment below telling us why you didn't like the video. And if you liked us, let us know, and subscribe to the channel, because that lets the overlords at YouTube know that you know what, you're all right.